Have you found that in your life, at least after the times you realized God was the closest, were the toughest, biggest rocks? You may not have known it at the moment. God says, I'm not going to tell you that when you become a believer, I'll clear this thing off and it'll be as flat as the sidewalk out in front of folks on the family. What I'll promise you is every rock will have enough honey to go one more step. And if you can't live with that, I would deeply argue whether you can be a follower of the rabbi. You don't live in the desert long before you realize this is all about God. Akiba said, be careful when you pray for honey. Understand where God may put it. Isn't that cool? Anyway, we need to move on. 81. There are people who live there. They're called Badu in Arabic. Baduin, people who are Badu. More than one Badu. Baduin. Bedouin, they're nomads. They live much like Abraham did. I lived with this family. Like I said, water came out of wells and cisterns. Hospitality like you can't imagine. I'm going to skip some of this again, pardon. The shepherds are always old women and little boys and girls. I spent about, I think 7 days, 6.5 days out in the field with the flock. Now, it's hard to describe to you what that meant because I'm an unrelated male. The moment I showed up, every woman in that family had to be completely veiled. And I was never permitted to be anywhere, me and one of the daughters or wives in that family. The man had 4 wives and 11 daughters at that time. And I couldn't be with any of them, even the little ones, because I'm unrelated. You just don't mix. So I communicated back and forth that I wanted to see the shepherds. Okay, fine. But that meant I had to go along with his daughter. So he sent his son, who was probably 20 at the time, and his son made sure that I could stay close to watch the daughters and the children, but that I never got closer than what would be comfortable for the female. The shepherds in this culture are almost always old women, girls who haven't menstruated yet, little boys who aren't adults, which is age 12, or once in a while a young married woman who has no children. Now plug that into the Christmas story. Tell me that every Christmas program you've ever seen, they make the shepherds 40-year-old males with a beard and a stick. If there were any 40-year-old males with a beard and a stick that night in Bethlehem, it would have been the weirdest assembly of shepherds that culture had seen in 1,000 years. Those were kids, and maybe an old woman or two. I have a hard time with Christmas, because if there's one season of the year which is way culturally off, for maybe the right reasons, it drives me crazy. They've got cows. There hasn't been a cow in Bethlehem in 1,500 years. They've got camels. Camels in Bethlehem? Ugh. No. Mary's on a donkey. On a donkey, give me a break. That would mean she owned a Mercedes. Mary walked, pregnant, 110 miles in some of this desert. Don't take it out of... So I was in church. I had to go see this Christmas program because my grandson was in it. Now I got this dilemma. You know, I just usually have this cold that I can't go on Christmas because I've had this cold. So I walk in church, and here they had the second grade girls, shepherds. I saw them in the back of church. It's like, yes! So I go in, I say to my wife, I say, Esther, you're not going to believe this, but they've got the shepherds are girls. She's, really? Then you'll be happy finally at a Christmas program. So they come down, they'd given each one of them a beard and a stick. So they had all the, anyway, that's the shepherds. Like this. Or this, same one. Or these, not menstrual yet, but that one is. She's married. An old woman. That's the girl who had the flock that I spent the time with. She knew every one of those sheep by name. It was absolutely incredible. About 175 sheep. This girl was 15. She was probably 40 miles from home. And if she didn't find water twice a day, those sheep were going to die. It blew my mind how people lived in the biblical time. But let me take you to the point I want to make about the shepherd. Once in a while, a boy, under an adult. Oh, man, I left that out. Okay, I've got to show you. Can you pardon me just a second? Even if you can, I'm going to find it anyway. Anybody have a question while I'm looking for this? Absolutely nothing. You will never find... It is unbelievable how little the men do in that culture. Yeah, that's, boy, now you're going to, I don't know if I should do this or not. Give me a chance to find it, and then I'll address your question. Psalm, help me out. In the Hebrew, you don't learn the chapter and verse because everybody knows. What Psalm says is the Lord is the shade at my right hand, which in Hebrew means as close as my right hand. He's this close always. Is it 30? I would have guessed. Seen that many, many, many times. Here we go. I've seen that many, many times. I've got about 3 questions. Give me a second here, and I don't know why I didn't put these slides in. First of all, shepherds in that culture live in caves underground at night. I've spent many a night with students like you even on a couple of occasions where we'll spend a serious amount of time in the sheepfold or the stable with the sheep. The thing that drives me crazy about that is you get in there, Psalm 21:5, 121:5, okay? The manure will be this deep on the floor, 3 inches of soot on the ceiling, not a sprig of hay or straw anywhere that you will ever see. And what drives me crazy is God said, I love you guys so much that I'm going to leave heaven to be born in 3 feet of sheep manure. And you know what we do? We spray nice pine scent, and we put these big, beautiful pine trees, and we've got this golden straw and these clean mangers, and we miss the whole point. You'd be far better off celebrating Christmas in a neighbor's pig barn or turkey barn than in your church, because you'd be much closer to what God is trying to say. Do you understand how much I love you? You know what I was willing to do for you? We make it so you almost can understand God wanted to come here, because it's not quite heaven, but it's almost. Anyway, let me show you the shepherd. As you look at this, what question comes to your mind? Okay, what do those sheep eat? I will never forget the first time. I grew up in a Midwestern farm. We didn't actually have sheep, but we had cattle, and it's like, what are these rock-eating sheep? What do the sheep eat? It's incredible. And you don't see sheep where the grass is this deep, ever. This is the land of the shepherd. So we were hiking. In my first week in Israel, I woke up one morning, and here came a flock of sheep coming, grazing up out of the wadi, led by a couple of shepherd girls. A very poor slide, but it's 30 years old. Led by a couple of shepherd girls. And I'm laying there thinking, what do they eat? And there are several other of my classmates that were sleeping there up against the rock out of the night wind. And so I leaned over, one of them was awake, and I said to him, what do those sheep eat? He laughed. They always laughed at me because I had a master's degree and I didn't know what sheep ate. They thought that was pretty ridiculous. And he said, well, think. He said, every afternoon, the wind comes very strong from the west. What's west? Mediterranean. So the wind carries moisture. The moisture condenses on the windward side of rocks, and overnight these little tufts of grass grow. One here, one here, one here, one here. And the shepherd finds hillsides that have been exposed to the wind, and the sheep get a mouthful here, a mouthful here, a mouthful here, and a mouthful here. Okay? I'm furiously taking notes, which they also think is ridiculous because their view is you take notes so you don't have to think. I'm furiously taking notes. And I said to him, what do you call this? In Hebrew, he said, I'll do it in English. The Lord leads me into, this is what the Middle Easterner calls green pastures. And then he got annoyed with me. Well, they're always annoyed, but he got really frustrated with me. Because he said, you Westerners take Psalm 23 and you make the green pastures belly deep alfalfa. And if you become God's sheep, he plunks you down where you have everything you need for the rest of your life. Do you know, he said to me, whether or not you have what it takes to handle what's going to happen to you in 10 minutes? First I thought he knew something I didn't. And then I'm thinking, I have a wife and 3 kids. I could imagine news coming. I didn't want to think about it, I couldn't deal with that. Why, he said, isn't this goat worried? Well, he's got a mouthful. And then a shepherd. The Lord leads me into green pastures is moment by moment by moment. Listen to me, folks. You don't have anything more than the tuft of grass you need right now, I promise you. But if you have a shepherd, whatever 10 minutes from now will bring, there'll be grass. That's all you get. And we Westerners want retirement accounts, bank accounts, fridges filled with food, houses with far more than we'll ever need because we want to make sure we have enough. And God says, you forget where you live. You're desert folk. You don't believe this? Then I'll put you back there. Now, that's the desert. The foundation of the biblical system are 24 pictures or more, every one of which says all you get is just enough shade, just enough water, just enough honey, just enough green pastures to go one more step. You want more than that? Then you're a goat. And you know what happens to goats. And to the goats on his left, he said, you go to hell. Yes, I don't see who's that. Yes, ma'am. First name. Teresa. Thank you. You've got your... The sheep will always follow the shepherd's voice. Look. Look, where are the goats? All over the place. Every shepherd will tell you 90% of their time is spent trying to keep those lousy goats here. Those sheep, if that shepherd walks 200 meters and calls them, that whole flock will come in 1 or 2 straight lines right to the shepherd. Voice, voice, voice. The only reason the Middle Easterners have a dog is for hyenas. I've never seen a dog chase sheep in the Middle East. That's more of a British thing that got introduced to part of the world. These are the goats. They never follow the shepherd. In fact, since you're interested in that, you see the trails where the sheep walk? Those are called paths of righteousness. The paths of righteousness. Why? Because a sheep will go directly to the voice. So let's imagine I got a flock of sheep back here. Here's a canyon, a wadi, 100 feet deep. And here I am. Hey, you guys, come on over. That whole flock of sheep will walk right into that canyon. They'll all die. Goats will go around. Those sheep, you'd have a whole flock of dead sheep. So the shepherd has to keep the path straight. So the sheep don't have to go in a curve. So the shepherd first goes over there and says, Roah, and then here, Roah, and then here, Roah. So the path is always straight. When the shepherd calls, you go to the voice because there's nothing dangerous in between you and the voice. My sheep, said Jesus, hear my voice, they know my voice, and they follow me. By voice. You don't follow Jesus by force. Goats. And you look at that and you think, God, that's an interesting, maybe you don't, but I would think that's an interesting way of the Lord leads me in paths of righteousness. By the way, notice, the Lord leads me to green pastures. The Lord leads me by still waters, which I skip. The Lord leads me in paths of righteousness. When it starts to get dark, and I watch these little kids with those sheep, little kids, this girl was far tougher than I am. Watch these little kids. When it started to get dark, they get real nervous because sheep, again, will go to the voice. And if there's any danger in between, see if I put that, look where the flock of sheep and goats end up being. If there's anything in between, the sheep will go right into the danger. So the moment it gets dark, you'll see the shepherds back, and pretty soon they're right in the middle of the flock. I think I had a picture of that earlier. Bear with me a minute, as Rachel said to Leah. Here it is. Notice how, as it starts to get dark, the shepherd gets right in the middle. You can tell I'm a Stephen Wright fan. The shepherd gets right in the middle. Now listen to the psalm. The Lord leads me. He's 200 yards ahead. Don't ever think of God as coming up behind you with a stick trying to keep you in line. You don't want to stay in line? You are welcome to join the goat brigade. Not welcome, but you can. God ain't going to stop you. Been there? Just remember what happens to goats at the end. It's profound. But he leads me to green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. Even though I walk through the valley of the darkest shadow, we say shadow of death, which is implied, though that's not what the Hebrew says. The darkest shadow, I will not be afraid, for you are with me. And notice at that point, the shepherd comes and is with. It's right out of the Middle Eastern mind. Now, I find people intrigued by this. Intrigued by this. This, by the way, is the basis for the rabbi. The rabbi learns his method from the shepherd. Then I take a group of people to Israel. Okay, I'm going to be your shepherd. I'm going to be your rabbi. Which means, even though I'm a poor one compared to them or to the real rabbi, Jesus, you got to follow me because I know the path. Come on. And away I go. And I know exactly what I'm going to see. I'm 200 yards out. I turn around, and every type A American has found a better way. So there are some up here, and there are some up here, and there are some over here. Stop! The shepherd knows the path. You can't diverge. So if I'm not too intimidated by the group, stop, let's go back. I've gone with rabbis where he'll walk 5 miles. And at the end of the 5 miles, he'll say, did you see the, let's pick one. Did you see the acacia with the roots twisted? And he knows that at that point, a bunch of us took an easier way because we didn't have to climb way down and then way up. It was easier to step above. So we didn't see the roots. 5 miles. Come, and you walk back. 5 miles. Turn around and say, come, follow me, lech acharai. And away you go. And everyone is right in line, one behind the other. Very difficult to teach that to a group of Westerners in the Middle East. But listen to me. Sorry. If you follow Jesus, you do not have the luxury of picking the path that looks easier. There is only one. Started the system of reclaiming his world to what the rabbis call the kingdom of heaven in the desert. So come with me to the desert. And I'm going to get out of this program and get back to the other one at this point because I like that one. I tailored that one, I think, more for you. So let me see once. It's got a lot of the same pictures, but for some reason I had some. Here we go. Okay. Living in that desert was a man and his wife and mistress, Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And no children yet. That's all he had. I know we talk about him being rich, but realize rich and rich in that culture means something very different. So one day God showed up. This is Genesis 15. I'll just walk you through it very abbreviated. God showed up and said, Abraham, I'm your shield, and you just won the lottery, which is basically what great reward means. You just won a big prize. I'm your shield and your prize. Why does God talk like that? Is that weird? If you were in your room tonight getting ready for your devotions and suddenly, boom, there was God, whatever form he took, and you knew. And God said, I am your shield and your reward. You just won the lottery. Okay. Why does he talk like that? Who's he talking to? Thank you. Abraham's a Jew. You got to put it in pictures. Abraham needs to see it, to feel it. You know what a shield does, Abram? Yeah, it sheds the arrows and the death blows. Yeah. You know what the lottery winnings are? Well, they probably didn't have a lottery, but unexpected, undeserved gift. Wow. Cool. Now, if God showed up in your room tonight and told you that, what would you do? What's your reaction? Oh my gosh, aren't you down on your face going, whoa, why? Now what? Who, me? Is my mother praying again? I mean, you'd be asking, wouldn't you be asking some questions? Abraham is Jewish. But, where's my kids? You promised me kids. Where are they? Tell me that didn't take guts. And it's not in Hebrew a particularly respectful way to say it. I wouldn't say it's disrespectful. It's street talk. It's not formal. Dear Father, can you please explain to me, because I'm thick-headed, why I don't have any children yet? It's, where's my kids? You promised. Now, the Jews have a word for that attitude. It's in Hebrew, chatsufo. Chatsufo is translated into English, faith, which I struggle with because it's not wrong, but chatsufo means a persistent, I will not let go of God under any conditions. No matter what, I will keep pushing and trying. I want to be there. The modern Hebrew word chutzpah. You know chutzpah? Chutzpah. Watch Seinfeld. Chutzpah comes from this. Abraham's got chutzpah. He says, God, okay, you're my shield and your reward, my reward, but you promised me children. Where are they? It's the woman with a sick baby coming to Jesus and saying, Rabbi, I'm a Canaanite. I know you Jews don't mix with us, but my baby is sick. And I see Jesus beginning to cry. That's my guess. And he says, lady, the Heavenly Father sent me to the lost sheep of Israel. You're not my mission field. I can't help you. It wouldn't be faithful to my Father. We've got a saying, you don't give dog food to children and you don't give children's food to dogs. Give to those that it's supposed to be. I can't help you. I think he's crying. Ask him someday. Now, if I'd have been that woman, think about it. Well, who do you think you are? You Jews. You're going to not give me? The lady comes right back. Yes, you're right, Rabbi. We don't deserve this. But even the dogs go under the table and lick up what's left. Please, it's my baby. And Jesus turns to the disciples and says, I haven't seen faith like this. No, that's not the good church. I haven't seen chutzpah. This lady won't quit. God likes people like that. He wants you in his face, respectfully, wanting more than anything else to claim what he promised and what he wants. Go for it. So Abraham says, God, where's my kids? And God says, okay, Abraham, calm down. You're Jewish, I understand. Come on outside. Come on outside. Look at the stars. You see them? Count them. I can't. That's what your descendants will be like. Promise. And Abraham says, that's good enough for me. You promised me. You gave me a picture. You got it. Then God says, you know what, Abram? There's so much I need to tell you here. You know what, Abram? I'm going to give you this land. Now, here's something you ought to write in big letters. If not in your notes, then in your mind. People take the phrase, the land, out of the Bible, and they assume that the promised land was something promised to Jews, and that applies to Jews. Well, there's a sense in which that's not false. That's correct. Land in the Bible is the place God gives you to serve him. Are you guys mostly seniors, college seniors? Okay. Anybody here mind? Do you have a job already? I mean, something lined up? Or you? I need somebody who says, yeah, I got a pretty good idea what I'm doing. Anybody?
We'll be working at Pizza Corporation in Dallas.
Okay. So you're fairly certain that's your land. The land God will give, what's your first name?
Jeff.
Jeff is going to be in the Pizza Hut corporate headquarters, did you say? Pizza Hut corporate headquarters. That's his promised land. The land is the place God gives you to carry out your faithfulness. So God said, okay, Abram, and I'm going to give you this land. What do you think Abram did? He's Jewish. How can I know for sure? Prove it. Show me. I got nothing, God. If my wife were to die, I don't even have a tomb to bury her. Show me. How do I know? Tell me that didn't take chutzpah. He's talking to God here. And God says, Abram, you're right. I need to show you this. Now, what happens in this setting is what in the culture is called a covenant. Now, just bear with me a minute. A covenant is not a relationship between equals. People talk about marriage covenant. I struggle with that, unless you say that the couple who's marrying is unequal. A covenant is between a greater and a lesser person or party. There's a superior and a subordinate. Now, I think marriage is a covenant, but not the way it's traditionally looked at, between a husband and a wife. I do not think that's the covenant. Because in a sense, there's headship and all of that, but equality, clearly in Paul, we're all equal in Christ. I prefer to say the covenant in marriage is between Almighty God and the couple. So I have a marriage covenant. Esther and I are in covenant as husband and wife with God. And the weddings I do today as pastor are always in light of let's make covenant together with God, and then we'll promise each other stuff. Now, in the covenant then, the greater party, let's call him or her A, and the lesser party, B, agree to a relationship, a permanent relationship. Party A sets all the requirements. B has absolutely no choice but to accept or reject. Yes or no? All of the requirements, all of what's laid on A and B are determined by the greater party. Does that make sense? So if God is going to make a covenant with Abraham, who's the greater party? Who's going to make all the conditions? God. So what are the requirements of this covenant? Well, God says, I'm God. Here's what I'll promise you. Here's what I'll lay on myself. I will give you land, place to serve me. I will give you descendants, like the stars, and one of them will be Messiah. Now, Abraham doesn't know anything about that, but he knows that one of the descendants will bless all the nations of the world. Are you with me? And God says, that's my requirement. And Abraham says, okay, God, that's good. What's mine? And God said, well, that's a real simple one. Be perfect. Easy to remember? You just be perfect. You be perfect, and I'll do whatever I promise. Land, descendants, Messiah. And God said, now I'm going to show you how serious I am about this. Let's seal the covenant in blood. I've seen this myself. Happens a little differently today. God said, Abram, I need 5 animals. Now, the next part, if you ever want to share this with someone, you need to hear this clearly, because otherwise you can't make this connection. Bring me 5 animals, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon. Now, I don't know how long it took him to catch all those things. But Abram's out, this old man, scouting them out. But notice what happens next. Abram brought these, and he knew what to do with them. God didn't tell him to cut them or to kill them. How did Abraham know that? What God asked, Abram understood, is something common in the culture. Abram knew what to do. He'd seen it before. He knows exactly what God is going to do. So God said, take these animals, divide half a sheep. I don't know if you've ever slaughtered an animal, but you got a bloody mess. Half a goat, half a goat, half a cow, half a cow. That alone is a barrel of blood. And you let that blood run down into a depression between the animals. Still do it today. I've seen it myself. You let the blood run down between the animals. Let me tell you a story. I lived with a Bedouin family. The last weekend that I was there, they always would sit at night around the fire and tell stories, which I didn't understand a word of, but I always laughed when they laughed and looked serious when they looked serious. They thought I was the strangest thing that had ever fallen out of the sky, honestly. But I was welcomed. So this day I noticed something different. They had been cleaning what cleaning they could do, all these tents all day long. Their clothes, they put on finer clothes, not that they had a lot. I knew something was happening. And as they sat around the fire that afternoon, in the distance I saw a cloud of dust and another group of people. Turned out to be another Bedouin family from maybe 15, 20 miles, I'm guessing, I don't know for sure. And they were related. They're all third, fourth cousins. And they sat together around the fire. And then as evening wore on, they had eaten broken bread together. As they sat around the fire, I could tell that something was happening. It got much quieter. And the 2 sheikhs, sheikh, you say in Arabic, the 2 patriarchs, sat together and were talking rather intensely. And everybody's listening, which is very un-Arabic, because in Arabic, Arab culture and Jewish culture, everybody talks at once. Here they're listening. And then I noticed that next to the visiting family was a young girl. From my point of view, she was veiled, so she had menstruated. She looked, I would have guessed 12, 13. And next to the family I was with was a young man, maybe 20, 25. And I gathered that what was going on there was an engagement. They talked for quite a while. And then the old man, the girls, I think it was her father, may have been her grandfather, he got up and he came back dragging a goat. Dragging this goat. Goat knew what was coming too, I think. He was in the culture too. Took that goat, cut its throat, and the blood ran and formed a puddle about 2 feet in diameter, just in the stone. I hadn't even noticed the depression there. And then, first the greater party in their culture, the young man's dad, stepped up, took off his sandals, looked over at his son. I remember him looking up, and he stepped in the blood like this. And it was deathly silent. I could see the blood running down his legs. I could see it splash on his white robe. I could see it splash on the robes of the people that were sitting near. And then the young woman's, I think, grandfather stepped up, looked at his daughter, granddaughter, whatever. I don't remember if he looked up, but he took off his sandals, and he stepped in. Now later, I would learn that that's called a self-maledictory oath or covenant. The idea is you make a promise. I will give you land, descendants, a Messiah. You be perfect. And if I break my word, if this young man isn't hardworking and honest and provides for your daughter a good family, you may do this to me. And if that kid turned out to be abusive, lazy, a thief, you'd find his dad's body in the bottom of a wadi with his throat cut, and there'd be sandal prints in his blood. Tell me that wouldn't change American Western culture marriage. If when you married, and then the young girl's dad, if the young girl that I'm giving your son to marry isn't a virgin, if she isn't honest, if she isn't hardworking, whatever he promised, I don't know, you may do this to me. Now, what blew me away at that moment is it dawned on me that when God came down to tell Abraham about this new way, he's walked right into the culture. And God said, Abraham, I'll tell you what, I will give you land, descendants, and one of them will be the Messiah. And if I don't keep my word, you may do this to me. Now, I don't know how you even think that, but imagine what God is saying. I love you so much. I'll walk barefooted in animal blood just to show you that I will at all costs I'll stake my life on my promise. Now, you're Abraham. What are you thinking? The text says, a thick and dreadful darkness fell over Abram. That's a Hebrew colloquialism, which means to be scared out of your mind. Because Abram knew that if he put his little toe in the blood, he was a dead man. He couldn't be perfect. If he was dead, no descendants. If no descendants, no Messiah. And there the old man stood, shaking. Two symbols appear. The first one is a smoking fire pot. In that culture, at the evening, they would put coals in the pot and cover it so that in the morning, the woman could dump the coals and start the fire for the day. In fact, Proverbs 31 says a godly woman is a woman whose fire never goes out. Heard some interesting sermons on that passage, which I'm not sure caught exactly the cultural meaning, but they were good sermons nevertheless. Now, we know this symbol is God because it's first, and the greater party always walks in the blood first. Think of examples in the Bible. That pot would then smoke like that from those coals smoldering. So it's really a smoke symbol. Show me in the Bible that smoke is used as a symbol, a picture of God. Give me an example. Children of Israel led by the pillar of smoke. We say cloud, but it's the word for smoke. Another one. Temple fills with smoke. Very good. Mount Sinai is covered with smoke. So God comes down and says, Abraham, I promise you. Now it's Abram's turn. And we get a second symbol. It's a torch. But in the Bible, fire, in every single case where it's used as a picture, is a symbol of God. Give me an example. Tongues of fire on Pentecost. Burning bush, pillar of fire, fire on Mount Sinai, fire in the temple. Now I want you to picture something. Abraham walked up to the blood. I'm dramatizing, but Abraham walked up to the blood. Took off his sandals. He knew that if he stepped 1 foot into that blood, he was a dead man. And from a human point of view, the whole plan of, we call it salvation, was gone. And as he stepped his foot, maybe shaking with fear and anguish and grief, God put his hand in Abraham's chest and said, step aside, my friend. And God came a second time. Abraham, if you ever break your word to be perfect, if you or your descendants ever sin, you may do this to me. And at that instant, God sentenced Jesus Christ to death. In a desert picture, I see Jesus sitting in heaven, watching his dad sentence him to die. Because from that moment on, they knew that the sin of those who were in Abraham would be paid for, not by Abraham's blood, but by God's blood. Now, what kind of a God will come down from heaven, walk barefooted in the blood, and said, not only will I do what I promised, but I'll pay the price where you fail? But that's not the end of it. From that point on, every single sacrifice that was made on the ancient altars was not to forgive sins. People have this thing that Jewish people believe that by killing an animal you forgive sins. Never did the Jews say that theologically. I'm not saying there weren't Jews who thought that, but that's a misunderstanding. The sacrifice was your way of saying, God, please keep your word. This blood from the cow, the goat, the sheep, the pigeon, and the dove is our way of reminding you of your promise. Please do what you promised. Pay for our sins. And God was so serious about this that he said, Moses, now we're 400 years later, I want there to be services where I put my name, first in the tabernacle, then in the temple, every day at 9 and at 3. This is in Deuteronomy. And at 9 and at 3, every day, I want an animal to be killed for all Jews. So that no matter where you are, in Israel or 1,000, 5,000 kilometers away, at that moment you know God is being asked again, please keep your word. And Moses must have thought, but God, what if it's raining? Then you'll get wet. And what if it's snowing? If it's 9 and 3, then wear something warm. Holidays? Of course holidays. Sabbath? You bet Sabbath. Every single day at 9 and 3. Don't miss it. First they did it at the tabernacle. Then Solomon's temple. And by Jesus' day, this unbelievable construction that Herod built. Now, by Jesus' day, this thing had evolved into a big deal. 5 to 9, 5 to 3. There's a priest by the altar. That's a model, but by the altar with an animal. There's another priest with a sundial. And another priest on the corner called the pinnacle corner of the temple with a shofar. And as the sundial, or on a dark day, the hourglass turned, the signal would be given. The priest would get the knife ready, and the man on the pinnacle would call, depending on what time of the year it was, thousands of people that the sacrifice was at hand. The whole city would fall silent. The priest would take his knife and cut the throat, catch the blood, throw it against the altar. Every single day at 9 and at 3. And other than the destruction of the temple for 70 years, this had been going on for 1,400 years. Now come with me. Jerusalem. There's 2 million people in town if Josephus is right. It's a high holy day. Unleavened bread. There's a priest at the altar. A priest at the hourglass. A priest on the pinnacle. The only difference from all other days is that just outside the western gate, near an abandoned quarry, were 3 men on crosses. And the middle one looked dead. And now it was 3 o'clock. And the city came to silence. And the text says, the man in the middle raised his head, looked up to his dad, and in the gagging, choking voice of a crucifixion victim, he screamed, "It's finished!" And he died at exactly 3 o'clock. Just the way his father promised. And when he screamed, "It's finished," I don't think he meant his suffering only. I think he meant it's all finished. All the blood, all the death. I did it. Listen to me. Pictures matter. There are no words to tell you what you just learned. And if you or I miss the pictures, our faith is here and not here. I will never forget sitting under the black sky with a million stars, shaking, because for the first time I understood the love of God as I watched a Bedouin man kill a goat. And he walked there for me. And he was crucified at 9, and he died at 3. I never know what to say. And my rabbis would say, "Don't say anything, you nudnik. This is a picture." And you know what's amazing to me? I don't think I told anyone here anything you didn't already know theologically. What makes this so different? About the heart. Anyone have a thought or a question? Yes. First name.
Sarah. I had a rabbi tell me that when she said on the cross, that when he said, "My Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" And Christian teaching always says that, God turned his back on him. But the rabbi was telling me that that he was quoting the first verse of the song.
This afternoon. Bless you. Awesome. That's the death psalm. Every Jew wishes to die reciting the words of Psalm 22. And I'm going to show you this afternoon that is exactly 6 of Jesus' 7 sayings come out of Psalm 22. He's choking out Psalm 22. So we'll get to that. Good question. First name. I'm sorry. Zach.
You're saying that you think Jesus, up in heaven with Abraham, that promise to do to Abraham about death. That's
You're correcting me. Let me say this more precisely. I should not have said, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'll correct myself. I should not have said that was the first time Jesus knew he would die. What I should have said is Jesus in heaven watched his Father sentence him to death. This is his sentence. Being God, he of course knew that at creation. But I think this is the point in history where from a human point of view, Jesus watched it become official. That more precise? Thank you. That was a good comment. Yes, first name? Charity. Okay, let me answer that question, and then I want to take a break. You need a few minutes to catch your minds, and I want to shift to something very different. We've built now the footing walls. We're ready to start the building. Orthodox Jews. I'm going to say one thing now and one later. To the Orthodox Jew, you still wait for God to suffer. It's still coming if Jesus isn't Messiah, wasn't Messiah. When the temple was destroyed, they had to come up with a new way to ask God for forgiveness. The new way was to sacrifice yourself by obedience. Now, they don't believe you're saved by obedience, but obedience becomes what the animal blood was. It's your way of God saying, God, I've tried to obey you as my way of asking for your mercy. Paul writes, offer your bodies living sacrifices. And then he goes on to list some commandments. Same idea. Now, the question that you're also asking, tell me if I'm wrong, is why don't the Orthodox Jews see what appears to be so clear? That I'll address in a little bit different way this afternoon. I have 10 to 11. At 11 o'clock, I'd like to start again. Bless God for you. And so I'll see you then. What I'm going to do is our website is up at this point, so I'm going to give the students the website, and they can peruse that and find whatever they want.
Okay, that's even better.
Right.
Same question more personally. You move between Bedouin culture and Jewish culture historically, in my example. Are those that overlapping? The examples of Bedouin, were those Bedouins Muslims that you stayed with?
Yeah, religiously, yeah.
So do they share this ritual closely?
Sure. Culturally, very close.
Very
Hospitality.
The shedding of blood.
Yep, very, very close. You would say this is the way I do when we go to Israel. If you want to know the patriarchal culture, you got to live with a Bedouin. If you want to know the culture of Israel in the king's period, you have to live with a Palestinian. If you want to know the Jewish people from Jesus' time, you have to live with the Orthodox Jews.
I see. Very good.
So you bet. Hi, Jeff.
Maybe not so quick. Last time we were here, I picked up Our Father Abraham's book, and I read through it. I had a couple of questions regarding the Passover week, and we tend to think that Jesus was probably crucified. I think when the Passover lambs were, from part of my understanding is that he was crucified when the Passover lambs were, which would have been probably Friday.
Let me show you something here that at least enters into the whole. What people forget, or maybe don't know, is that there are actually two Passover sacrifices. You get what, for lack of a better word, some have called the national sacrifice. That's the one I just mentioned. That's at 9 and at 3 p.m. for all Jews. Actually, God-fearers and Gentiles who come in as well. That goes on every day. Then there's the family sacrifice. Now, if we assume that Passover is on Friday, in the year Jesus died, these two would have been held on Friday. The meal is held at the beginning of the day. Right, of the day. The family sacrifice is at the beginning of the day. When is the beginning of Friday? Thursday night. So I would argue the best schematic says Jesus did the Lord's Supper, Last Supper, Passover, during the family. That came out of the family sacrifice because he's teaching community. His death is on the national sacrifice because it's for everyone. And I think the mistake people make is they want to make this animal that's eaten in the Seder meal to be the one that Jesus died with. But I think God is doing something very different. I think God is saying, no, you're not going to die here because this is about community. And Jesus came to build community. You're going to die here because this is about a sacrifice for everyone. So I think that's the best. Now, not everybody agrees with that, but if you look at the Jewish point of view, if you look at David Flusser, for example, in his discussion of this, he makes this very strongly. The Christian debate is which of the two sacrifices. And because John seems to talk about this one, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke seems to talk about this one, there have been some who said, well, John was wrong. There have been others who said, no, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are wrong. But I'm saying the better way to resolve the dilemma is to say there are two sacrifices. From a Jewish point of view, it fits perfect. Exactly. Plus, the picture then becomes profound in both ways.
You talked about
Mike.
In your lecture about coronation and all that, about holding final sacrifice in the Roman.
Yeah. I'm thinking you meant this morning.
No.
Yes.
Going through the 7 steps.
Yes. The 8 steps, yeah.
Or 8. And it talks about in 22 about being surrounded by the Lord. Does that have anything to do with that?
22.
In Psalm 22. 7 or something like that.
That's really interesting. See, that's a great insight. That is definitely worth pursuing. Right now, I cannot think of anything I've ever come across, but that could be a real interesting insight. Leave me your email address. Let me just take a look at that, and I'll have to think about it. I can't give you any more than that right now. Thank you, Mike.
I didn't hear all of this conversation, but what you made before the accounting of days, which is death and resurrection. I understand that any part of a day was a day.
Yeah.
The problem that I have then is what about that? And I forget where this is where it says who was the 2 or 3 days and 3 nights.
No, it doesn't say that. I'll tell you what it does say. Sorry, I don't mean to correct you, but it says, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights, Jesus will be in the tomb. It does not say 3 days and 3 nights in connection with Jesus. So I think on that case, you might say, well, that hints that it was, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But from a Jewish point of view, see, there's 2 things at work here. One is Jesus is fulfilling the sign of Jonah, clearly, and he makes that case himself. The other thing is legal death, because in Jewish law, from the time a person is legally dead, a person has to be buried on the same day that they died, unless you're within 1 hour of sunset. Then you are given a second day if you want it. So when you count legal death, that's called the first day, the day of burial. If it's 23 hours or it's 1 hour, doesn't matter, it's called the first day. The family sits in the tomb on the first day, and the mourners come, crawl in the tomb, and sit with the family, 1 at a time, 2 at a time, depends how big the tomb is. At the end of the first day, the stone is rolled in front of the tomb, but it's not sealed. Now, the second day always is 24 hours. On the second day, the guests gather outside the tomb. Okay? Now we come to the third day. The moment 1 hour of the third day has occurred, okay, 1 hour, the tomb is opened, and you are to call the person's name 3 times. Eleazar, Eleazar, Eleazar. If nothing, they're legally dead. The stone is closed and sealed. So the legal death for a Jew, by widespread Jewish writings, all you needed is 1 hour, 24 hours, and 1 hour for legal death. I happen to believe Jesus was raised from the dead 1 hour after sunset on Saturday night. And there's a reason for that comes out of the cultic practices of the Jews. Now look at this. Jesus was put in there on Friday, if my accounting is correct. He's put on there on Friday, but the odd thing is the stone is rolled and sealed on the first day. Shouldn't be. Should be sealed here, but it was sealed because of Pilate, not because of the Jews. Now the women can't come to anoint the body here. Why? This is Sabbath. You can't anoint a body on the Sabbath. So they needed this day. They come early in the morning, because they can't go at night, so they don't go 1 hour after sunset. They come early in the morning here, but they have a problem. The problem is sealed. I always took that to mean they're saying, who's going to open this huge rock? A tomb is made to open easily and close difficult. Because the idea is we look forward to erection. So we look forward to resurrection. Sorry. So the idea is you've got to be able to roll the stone open easily. The problem the women had is whose seal is on the stone? Caesar's, Pilate's. So to open that stone was crucifiable. Who's going? Well, God came down and said, Pilate, who's Pilate? And blew the stone away. And he comes out. Now, plug in the story of Lazarus. When does Jesus show up in Lazarus's sequence? 4th day. So Jesus shows up here. Now, what had happened on this day? Somebody had said, Eleazar, 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 and nothing. Now, the 4th day, Jesus leans down and says, Eleazar! And out he comes, which makes that a really powerful story because the shouting hadn't worked here, but it worked here. Now, the reason I think he was raised right after sunset is, if I'm right, this is Friday, and this is the Passover. This is Saturday. This year it happened to be unleavened bread, because unleavened bread is always on the first Sabbath after Passover, so it happened to be the next day. This is the Feast of First Fruits. As the sun was setting, to begin celebrating first fruits, as the sun was setting, all the Jewish people would bring their first fruit gift to God as the sun set. So Jesus was the first fruits of those who were raised from the dead, raised on first fruits. So I argue, when did he appear in the heavenly temple? But at sunset, not in the morning. This is my PhD. Sunset on, when is sunset for Sunday? Saturday. Remember, for a Jew, the day always begins the evening before, so Jews have already had Friday night. You guys have it coming yet. The Jewish Friday night is last night. Tonight is Saturday night. So when you look at Jesus, you have to make sure where the night is. Yeah, my view is he spent 26. But I'm not going to argue that one way or the other because it doesn't really matter. What's interesting here is he's killed with a Passover lamb. He's buried as every Jewish family is putting wheat in the ground and praying, God, give us life out of the earth. He's being buried, planted. And he's raised as they bring first fruits. Which makes Corinthians, he's the first fruits of those raised. Exactly. Awesome. I'll be around for lunch, so.
I have a question. How do you spell wine?
W-A-D-I.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question.
Please.
Where you have all your artifacts, like the horn drum and all that stuff, is there anywhere you could purchase that stuff,
You
or
bet.
unless you go to
Interested?
the Holy Land? Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because I go to Judeo Christian kind of structured church, and like those types of artifacts are needed.
Okay.
Because
What I will
for
do,
symbolism purposes.
with your permission, is I will ask you to ask that question in front of the class, and then I'll answer. You don't want to?
No.
Okay. Then I will just answer it for you. How's
Okay,
that?
thanks.
Okay. You're welcome.
I was like praying. I'm like, God, come on. Feeling like,
Can I get a glass of water? That would be great. Here, I never got to the coffee, so. Okay, can we get back to starting, please? While you're finding your places, I told you I get so pumped about this group. Tell me how awesome it is to stand up here and to see like 20 people all wanting to learn more about Jesus. Oh, man, it's like I died and went to heaven. It's just so phenomenal. Honestly, it's so cool. A couple of questions came up that I thought might be worthwhile for all of you to hear. Somebody asked about things like the prayer shawl, the shofar, and other things that I use. How can you get one? Boy, do I have a deal for you. There's a catalog, a website called Everything Jewish. It's one word, Everything Jewish. It's an Orthodox Jewish organization. Some of the stuff is going to cost you a fortune, but they also sell things. This would be called not kosher because it doesn't follow every rabbinic law, but it's a great teaching aid. So this probably wouldn't cost you so much, whereas if you bought a kosher one, it could cost you $1,000. And they'll range all the way from $10 to $5,000 for the same thing. It's called Everything Jewish. Just type that in. Thank you very much, Mike. Type that in, and you'll be at that website. They also publish a rather large catalog if you prefer the hard copy. One last thing. I don't know whether it's .com or I don't remember. It's been a long time since I did that. I think I'm going to wait with this now that I think about it. I had some great questions about Passover. That's my dissertation area, is the whole death of Jesus in context. And so there's a ton of stuff I'd love to tell you. Let's wait till this afternoon, and if we don't have time, I'll try and stay around a little while this afternoon, and we can pursue that if you still have any sponge left. Okay. Now, getting a little bit closer to my subject or my theme, what I've tried to do is to build you a foundation. The bottom layer of the foundation was Eastern thinking. The second layer is the desert, and the third, where the shepherd comes from, the third layer is God's use of the blood path image to say, this is how I'm going to do it. Okay? Now, in being in rhythm with God, I'm going to skip the whole Old Testament. You ought to all die inside for a while. And we'll move to the life of Jesus. Jesus was a desert man, at least part of his life. Do the shepherd image very well. So let's talk about being in rhythm with God and the life and times of Jesus. Would you stand, please? Let's say it together. If you need the help with the Hebrew, great. Shema Israel. Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai Echad. Together. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Amen. Say these words after me. You are my friends.
You are my friends.
If you love one another.
You love one another.
I no longer call you servants.
I no longer call you servants.
A servant does not know his master's business.
A servant does not know his master's business.
Instead, I call you friends.
Instead, I call you friends.
Everything God taught me,
Everything God taught me,
I have taught you.
I have taught you.
These are the very words of God.
These are the very words of God.
Amen. Please sit down. That's John 15. Let me take you to the Galilee under the theme, the dust of the rabbi. Again, this is from my teaching experience at the college level. One whole course is going to come out of what we do in the next hour and 15 minutes. So anyway, these were the three main provinces besides Jesus' home province in his day. Decapolis was pagan, largely Greek and Roman. By pagan, I don't mean to put them down. I mean they're just Gentiles, pagan, goyim. Samaria were those half-breed, subhuman folks from the Jewish point of view. And I say that biting my tongue, but I want to show you that that was really true. The Judeans are, and I don't know how to say this nicely, these are the let's never change anything from the way we've always done it folks. The real traditionalists. They didn't dance in their synagogues. That's hokum and entertainment. They don't raise their hands when they sing. You're losing friends. Put them down. They didn't believe that rabbis could heal. That passed with the prophets. They didn't believe ordinary people should be given the Torah. They can't handle it. The Judeans were very much, I don't want to use the word conservative because conservative has to do with whether they took the Bible seriously. Everybody took the Bible seriously. In that sense, everybody is conservative. But when it came to tradition, those are the real traditionalists. Okay, quick history lesson. The Jews were taken out of Israel in 586. Remember the story? Babylonian captivity. The land was largely emptied, especially Galilee, either by death or by exile. 70 years later, there's now a huge community of Jews in Babylon and very few in Israel. Cyrus, king of Persia, said, Ezra, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, you may go home. Do you remember how many Jews went back? 22,000, which meant 500,000 to 1 million stayed in Babylon. Those who went back settled here and became the Judeans. The folks who stayed in Babylon apparently thought, we can serve God here. We've got the Torah. And not only that, but it's still under Persia, so why move from one place to another? We're still not free. So they stayed in Babylon. Babylon became the biggest Jewish community in the world in Jesus' day. Then came the Greeks, the Seleucid Greeks, the Ptolemy Greeks, and then came the Maccabees. The Maccabees defeated the Seleucid Greeks, and for the first time in 167, the Jews were free. At that point, as many as 250,000 Jews come back from Babylon and say, finally the country is free, we're coming home. Where do you think they settled? The one empty place, the province of Galil, Ha-Galil, the Galilee. They founded cities like Cana and Nazareth and Capernaum and Magadan and Magdala and Gennesaret and Gamla and Chorazin and Bethsaida. Are you listening? Now, that's a Jewish way to say it. Are you hearing? Those are the cities of Jesus' world. Now, these people were intensely patriotic, largely blue-collar, hard-working immigrants. They came home to the homeland. They were extremely emotional, charismatic. They danced in their synagogues. Their rabbis could heal. They were passionate about their faith. They wore their faith on their sleeve, in their heart, right on their sleeve. Who was Jesus? A Galilean, not a Judean. The Judeans couldn't stand him. Where did you study, you Galileans, with your accents? Who do you think you are? There's huge tension between Judean and Galilean. And what I'm going to tell you is Galilean, not Judean. And if you're going to follow up on this at all, or use it someday, or even adopt it as part of what you think would be a way to follow Jesus, you need to make that distinction. Because you can read the Judean literature and find out that that's not at all how the system was. You need to read the Galilean literature. And that was my background. I studied in the Orthodox Jewish tradition of Lubavitch, and Lubavitch traces their descent directly to the Galileans. So I had an opportunity to see in modern form what Jesus would have known. There were 3 villages, and I'm being generous, that are the core of the Galilee religiously. Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida. Jesus chose Capernaum for his home. Born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth, but he did his rabbi work, not his Messiah work, that's Jerusalem. Well, you can say you can't separate the two, I understand, but his atoning death, that's Jerusalem. But his rabbi work was out of Capernaum. So let me take you there. Some of you have been there. Here's the Sea of Galilee, right up above Magadan, if you recall. And there are the ruins, parts of the ruins of the city of Capernaum. Now, I like to take people in here, but it's hard for people to appreciate. This is a 4th century synagogue. It was built in the 400s, end of the 3, beginning of 400s. It's built on top of the one from Jesus' day. You can see beneath it the outline of another one. What blows people's minds, if you know anything about Judaism, is the size. The school connected to Capernaum Synagogue is the largest synagogue school ever found until the 1500s. It was huge. I don't know how to describe this. I say sometimes to students at our school, I say, this is Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford. I don't know what else you want to put in there. This was the best of the best. And that's where Jesus went. He's not a backward peasant in some little village where most people quit after 3rd grade. This guy's at Harvard. Well, let's forget Harvard. This guy's at Princeton or Yale or Oxford. Okay? Now you need to feel the power of this because the system was the same for all of them. So what was the system? There are 2 types of rabbis that existed in 1st century Galilee. Underline the word Galilee. This is not true in Judea. 2 types of Jewish rabbis. The ordinary dime store type, and I say that with biting my tongue, were called Torah teachers. What word do we use in English for Torah? Law. I don't like this. It's true. But Torah is so much bigger than law. Torah has law, but it's much bigger. It's like saying, RVL, you're a parent, therefore you're a disciplinarian. Well, that's true, at least in the past. When my kids were little, I had to be a disciplinarian occasionally. But parent is much bigger than disciplinarian. Torah is much bigger than law. So what was a Torah teacher? A Torah teacher, first of all, was a master of Torah. Baal Torah, you say in Hebrew. Master of Torah means he knew it by memory. Okay? I'll come back to that. Second, he was a master teacher. Parables. Delightful ways of making things stick. The rabbis call it shanan. Great teachers. Third, he was recognized by the community. He didn't get a diploma. He didn't have a degree. You know, that's one of the things that hit me, and I don't want to offend somebody here, but I'll tell you honestly, when I started the Jewish setting, I remember the first day of class, and there's 32 of us. Yeah, let me just set this up for you once. Because if you haven't studied there, it's so mind-boggling. It's like I just died and went to another planet. I walked into the program. It took me a long... They didn't want to let me in because they kept saying, you can't do this. Well, why not? Because you're a Christian. Well, so is that a moral thing? No, you just don't know anything. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Did you see these degrees? Yes, but you can't do this. You can't. You don't understand what you're asking. So I walked into class the first day, sat down. There were 32 of us. 31 had black, kippah, peyot, tzitziot. One was in Dockers and a polo shirt. I won't tell you which one I was. Within 15 minutes, I realized that 31 of them knew the Old Testament by memory. And I don't mean they could just say, okay, let me recite Isaiah. I mean you give them a sentence. They'll tell you the sentence before without you even telling them what book it comes from. And in more than one language, most of them. Most of them for sure in Hebrew and English, some in Yiddish. Then the class began. It absolutely blew my mind because I'm sitting there in the back thinking, you know what? I can't do this. I don't know anything. I understood what they were trying to tell me. You Christians know nothing. And that sounds terrible put down, but how many of you could recite 12 verses? When you sit with somebody who can recite 39 books, you don't feel like you know very much. So the rabbi came in, Leo Landman was his name, and he said, we went to the whole introductory thing, but then he began the class with 2 announcements. First he said, he stood in front of class, everybody's sitting there, they knew what to expect, I didn't. He turned to somebody and said, recite Genesis. I'm going, recite Genesis? You got to be out of your mind. What do you mean recite Genesis? I'm thinking this is a joke. So the guy started in Hebrew. In the beginning, God, stop! Recite Genesis. In the beginning, God, stop! Did that 7 times. And then he looked at us and he said, and if you don't believe that, there's the door. Because the rest of the book isn't going to make any sense. Faith is commitment, not knowledge. First. The Bible does not start out, here are the 17 proofs that God exists. The Bible starts out, in the beginning God. What do you think? Yes or no? No? Then the rest of it is going to be interesting, but will not say a word. Yes? You may not fit. Did you get my point? Then his second announcement just stunned me equally, but from a different view. He said, and one last thing, any of you that are here to get a degree, may I remind you that rectal thermometers have degrees, and you know what we do with those. We are not here for a degree. We are here to become men of God. And if you're here for the degree, there's the door. Now imagine, anyway, the community says this person knows the Torah, is a master teacher. We will sit at his feet. And it's osmosis, no votes, just time. They were limited. They could only teach what the community believed to be the right thing. Now that wasn't very limiting, to be honest, like it is in our theological system, but they had to teach based on what the community believed was the correct interpretation. They could come up with new parables, new illustrations, but they could not come up with new, brand new teaching. A Torah teacher teaches like this. It is written. That means, according to Rabbi Akiva, who said, so the text, the application, and the authority of others. I'm a Torah teacher. I belong to a denomination. I promised when I became ordained in that denomination that if I disagree with the denomination, I would do one of 3 things. I wouldn't teach it. If I believed it, I would try and change it. If I couldn't change it and it still bothered me, that I would leave the denomination. So I'm limited. I cannot teach contrary to our theology. I can come up with new ways. Does that make sense? Most of the rabbis of Jesus' day are Torah teachers. The second group are what we call rabbis with smicha. Say smicha. Smicha. Okay? There were not many of these. We know of about a dozen by name in the 100-year period in which Jesus lived right in the middle. So take 30 years, 35 years on each side of Jesus, and we know about a dozen. There must have been some more, but they're not real common. What's a smichad rabbi? A, they're masters of Tanakh. Say Tanakh. Tanakh. Do you know Tanakh? The Jews used the word Tanakh for the Old Testament. If you're having a conversation with an Orthodox Jew and you say Old Testament, you just lost. You've lost your edge. You can't, because you've just told them you have the updated version and theirs is outdated and no longer as good as yours. Argument closed. What you say to a Jew is Tanakh. Why? Because they say the Bible is made up of 3 parts. Torah, Navaim, and Chetuvim. Torah, Navaim, Chetuvim. You recognize Torah? Navaim means the history books and the prophets. Chetuvim means the writings. Im. Navi'im. So they took the first letters, ta, na, k, and you have Tanakh, the 3 parts of the Bible. Just to show you that this is relevant to Jesus' day, in Jesus' day, the rabbis believed when the Messiah came, all 3 parts of the Bible would attest that he's the Messiah. There would be a passage from Torah, from Navaim, from Chetuvim. Go with me. Transfiguration. Jesus is on the mountain. Elijah and Moses. You there? You aren't Jewish. A voice from heaven says, "This is my son, whom I love," or in one version, Luke, "whom I've chosen." And last, listen to him. Very good. Where does the phrase, "this is my son," come from?